Okay, guys, I thought I'd just make sure we're all caught up to speed on the course of the war itself. And so we're just going to follow along on the PowerPoint really quickly just to make sure that we're all good. So up until 1942, the Axis powers have been dominating the war in Europe and in the Pacific. It's not looking good. But in 1942, that's the year of change, really, when things start to shift more in the Allies' favor. So I figured we would just kind of get a little bit of information on what's happening here. So I'm not going to go through everything, but what we see on this slide is all I'm pointing out to you is that basically amongst the Axis powers, they all have different goals. And in a war, that's not necessarily what you want. You want everyone to be working towards the same goal. You should insert your favorite sports analogy right here. And so an example of that is when Hitler decides that he can't defeat Great Britain in the Battle of Britain, he wants to break that non-aggression pact with Russia, and he invades Russia. And this, while it can afford him more resources if he wins, it can also cost him a lot of resources and manpower if it doesn't go smoothly. Of course, Italy had no say in this, Japan had no say in this. And so, again, they're all kind of working towards these different goals. But what we see here is the Allies, even though they all have different ideas and visions for what the world should look like after the war, here we see Stalin, all right, we see FDR, and we see Churchill. Their only concern in these years is victory, and you can see that as they kind of agree on their Europe first strategy, where they all agree Hitler's the main threat, let's take care of him, and then we'll deal with Japan later on. So again, they're more unified in their approach. And so we're going to see this play out very quickly. Like I said, I'm not going to go through the war at sea. There's a new Tom Hanks movie you could watch to help you out with that. But we've talked about this in World War I with the convoy system being used, but also we have radar and sonar being used, depth charges. You can look at some pretty cool videos on that stuff. But technology, of course, is changing. But here we go. This is really what I want to highlight for you guys. Is despite the Allies controlling the seas, one thing that they can't control is the fact that Hitler has really laid down what we call the Festung Europa, which is these heavy defenses along the European coastline. And so even if the Allies are in control of Great Britain, there's no way they can get into Europe. Even if they control Africa, which they will, it's going to be very difficult to get into Europe. The only Allied power that is in Europe is the Russians, and they're under assault. And so this is the challenge, is how do we invade and turn back Hitler instead of letting him advance? And so the big turning point is Stalingrad. Go to that video that I posted at the very beginning of this quarantine on World War II from space, if you haven't already. And what we know is that here is the advancement on the map of the Germans into Russia. They get to Moscow, they're going to burn that down to the ground. But what they realize is they need Stalingrad right down here, because to the south are these very vital oil fields in the Caucasus Mountains. And we have already talked about how important oil is. Go back to that charts on that enrichment activity. And so Stalingrad is just a key place. And Stalin will not allow it to fall. It's his namesake city. And he orders that it be defended at all costs. And so what happens is, over time, they're able to stall the Nazis at Stalingrad until this winter hits in. We see this all the time, a winter saving Russia. And the city is laid to waste. But at the end of the day, the Russians are able to launch a counteroffensive and save the city. So that stops Hitler's offensive. And that's in the winter of 42 into 43. In Africa, very quickly here, we see here what's at stake is, for the Allies, they want to open up a second front. They've not been able to do that. There's only one front, and that's over here in the Soviet Union. But if they can open up a second front, they could hopefully launch an invasion of Italy. And so that's their goal. But for the Axis powers, what they are wanting to do is take control of the Suez Canal. And I cannot emphasize this enough. In terms of the military strategy, this is really key, because it controls the flow of goods and oil, and so whoever controls that has the upper hand in the economic and industrial field there. So that's a very important battle. I'm not going to go into all the battle stuff, but as you can see, what happens is when the United States invades Africa, this is our advancement right down here in the green, and the British advance the other direction from El Alamein, we are able to push out the Germans, and we can hopefully go forward with an invasion of Italy. But as we know, that's not a very easy task. And so at the Casablanca Conference, what we decided to do was basically step up our bombing strategies to try and soften that Festoon Europa. If you want a good movie suggestion, it was made in the 90s. It's called Memphis Belle. Go watch that. It's pretty good. But I'll let you guys do this heavy lifting here. I would point out this, because this kind of goes along with the main thrust of today's video, is the Tuskegee Airmen and their contribution during World War II. Can't emphasize this enough. They were escort pilots, and what that meant is they were kind of escorting these bomber planes. And these bomber planes are really like sitting ducks. They move slow, and they're flying over enemy territory during the strategic bombing during the daylight. And so it's the goal of the Red Tails right here to basically defend them. And the casualty rate was about 20%, but the Tuskegee Airmen lost 0 planes. It's really an incredible story. Make sure you go back and look at those video resources on the contributions by them, but also others. That this really was an effort by all Americans to win this war, and the Tuskegee Airmen are just an awesome example of that. But moving on, the next turning point is in the Pacific, and I want to show you this beautiful map. I love this. Oh my goodness. So here's our Hawaii. We know that that's been defended because Pearl Harbor did not knock it out. And the turning point is going to be here at Midway. And the map that we're looking at shows you why this is such a key and crucial turning point. It's because once we win at Midway, look at where the line is now, that we were able to push the Japanese back, and we can begin a strategy called island hopping. So the battle at Midway, kind of a cool story. Basically, this chart right here on this slide gives you a good sense of what's happening, but listen to this. All right, I'm going to draw a box around it. Going back to war production, what happens is when we sink their 4 carriers, they cannot replace those, all right? But when they sink 3 of ours, we are in the process of replacing those. So war production and what it affords us is that the Battle of Midway is a huge success for us. It is crippling and devastating for the Japanese. So a really big turning point there. So, like I said, we can go on to our island hopping from there, and we can start taking island by island until, of course, we reach the coast of Japan. That's the goal. So that's the turning points. Just wanted to catch us up on that. But really the main thrust of today is social changes and opportunities during World War II, and we're going to start with women.